I did not get to introduce myself properly earlier. My name is Malia Hunt Kachin Hitu. I'm a member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina and Turtle Clan, and I am also the Health Equity Coordinator for the American Indian Cancer Foundation, and it's an honor to be here today. So first, we're going to have our keynote speaker. I'm thrilled to welcome our keynote speaker for day one of the conference. We have Linda Black Elk. Her husband, Luke Black Elk, was supposed to be with us, but unfortunately, he was not able to. So they are food sovereignty activists and teachers of traditional plant use, gardening, food preservation, and foraging. They spend their time collecting and preparing traditional foods and medicines for indigenous peoples and communities in North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, and beyond. Luke currently serves as farm director from Makoki, Ikipu, and Linda is the education director at NAT-IFS. Together, they get their 3 sons involved in this amazing work, so they learn about the importance of nourishing themselves and their communities with good food and medicine. Welcome, Linda Black Elk.
Hi, everyone. I'm so honored to be with you guys today. It's always so hard to follow the kids up. I Ubered over here so that I didn't have to find parking, and they put an entire performance together. So I'm like, oh my gosh, so much energy. But the reason my husband couldn't be here is because his uncle passed away, so I really apologize for that, and he does too, but he's over in South Dakota at the services. I considered taking his slides out, but there were things he really wanted me to relay. I think most of it is very intuitive and stuff that you probably already know, but I think a little review is always a good thing. So the first set of slides are my husband's slides. He's from Cheyenne River. That's where he's at today. And so all of this comes from his perspective and the perspective of his teachers. He wanted me to make that really clear because we did also put together just yesterday a little guide for you guys with a list of plants that we and our teachers and our friends have used in various tobacco mixtures over time. And so everyone will get one of these, and there are color photos. It actually turned out pretty nice, so I hope you guys will enjoy those. And my coworker, Francesca Garcia, will come around putting stacks of these on your table, even while I'm talking. But, it's always hard to get up here and talk to people because I would much rather have a conversation with everyone and us just visit about all of this. But if you guys have any questions that are very pressing while I'm talking, feel free to raise your hand because I'm so happy to answer questions as we're talking. But I think one of the first questions that my husband wanted to answer is, what is traditional tobacco? And he and I tried to put Dakota and Ojibwe names up here. I know that does not by any means represent all the people here in this audience, but we just wanted to honor the homelands that we're on right now by trying to put as much of that in there as possible. So we all know, and we probably all use various mixtures of plants, and that doesn't necessarily always include nicotine tobacco, right? Sometimes it does, and there are many tribes and many people who grow Nicotiana species of tobacco, and there's even a native species, especially down in the Southwest. But these mixtures are used both, of course, for offering and smoking. Why do people want to use traditional tobacco? My husband really wanted me to impart this because traditional tobacco is all about connection, connection to the earth, because you know the plants that you're harvesting, you know the plants that you're growing, connection to each other, because we're learning from our communities, and everyone has a different blend, a different set of plants that they use. And when you talk to people about that, you start to understand them better and why they might use certain plants. So it's all about connection. It's all about that time and effort that you put in there. So I remember this one elder, Everett Jamerson on Standing Rock, was telling me that it's totally fine when people bring him a pack of cigarettes or a pouch of tobacco from the store, but he feels like he knows people are super serious about their requests when they bring a bag of like red willow bark that they cut and shaved themselves. And so it's that time and effort that gets put into it. It's also about the impact on land and water. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a second, but Luke wanted me to really impress upon you all. We were at a gathering where there were a number of elders, like Faith Spotted Eagle, and they were talking about how cigarette tobacco, when we use that as an offering on the land, a lot of those herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, and even the nicotine can completely change the soil chemistry of the plants around the offering. So when we put cigarette tobacco down, we're actually changing an entire little micro climate, like a little micro ecosystem by the use of that. And so oftentimes, like my husband and his teachers will recommend putting them into the fire instead of laying them down at the base of plants in order to protect the land or the water, the soil that are right there. Again, these are my husband's slides. So another reason to use traditional tobacco is that almost every one of the plants in these mixtures have other medicinal uses. So you're not just harvesting it as an offering. A lot of them have other amazing medicinal uses instead, in addition, and you'll see those in that guide that Francesca's passing out. So I didn't want you all to have to read all of this, and I don't know, Mr. AV guy over there, is it possible at all to click on that link that's on there and pull it up? So I think we all know the reasons, and the young people all, sorry, do you see the link yeah, that one. If it's possible at all, sorry for not alerting you to that. Okay, so the link there, which I wanted to show you guys, it's just, you guys know this, right? Why not use commercial tobacco? Obviously, commercial tobacco targets our youth. Our youth expressed that earlier this morning. As I said, the pesticides, the herbicides, the fungicides. I don't know how many of you all have been to a commercial tobacco production, like a farm. It depends on where you go, but most of them spray upwards of 55 different herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, all kinds of things on commercial tobacco. It's pretty nasty stuff. And the soil in those farms is really, really toxic, right? It's very hard to grow anything else in there years after. So the link that's on there, which I don't think we can get it pulled up, I'm not sure, but it's an entire list of what is on and in commercial tobacco. Many of you all have seen it. It's an FDA website, so you can go find it. But almost every one of those, I mean, like 99% of the substances are known carcinogens. And I think we all know this in this audience, right? We're kind of preaching to the choir here, but it's good to be said again. My husband also wanted to make sure that we talked about the fact that we don't just have to put tobacco out, at least most tribes don't. But again, this is just coming from his teachings. You can burn it. You don't have to put it in the water or on the land. You can burn it as well. Or there are some elders who say, put it in your pocket, wait till you get home, find a good place for it that's not going to harm other native plants or the soil when you're out. So that's a lot of what my husband wanted to talk to you about, is the who, what, when, where, why kind of thing. And again, I'm sorry that he can't be here today, but I'm an ethnobotanist, and so I really wanted to focus on some of my favorite plants and the plants that my husband and I utilize or we gift to people for their own tobacco mixtures. I think this is really important because I have a lot of friends who come to us for these plants because they don't know what they look like when they're out there. Almost all of these grow everywhere where we're at. These are not just Minnesota plants. Most of these grow where you live. We tried to choose plants that were pretty widely growing. And so if you guys have questions while I'm talking and while you're looking at those books, please feel free. These are just pretty much the slides. These slides are the ones in your books. And I'm not going to read off to you. I'm just going to talk about them. So this is true, quote unquote, true tobacco, if we're using that word. It is Nicotiana species. There are different varieties. Many of you have probably grown the yellow flowering variety, which is Nicotiana rustica, and you've gotten the seeds all over the place. They're pretty widely available now, and you can't, if you've ever grown tobacco, have you wondered like why they need to spray so much stuff on it? Because it's very easy to grow these, right? And they will reseed and keep coming back year after year. So if you have even a pot on your porch, on your balcony of your apartment, and your windowsill, and you have one tobacco plant, you will get a lot of tobacco from that one plant. And you want it to be, tobacco plants can grow, 6 feet tall. I mean, they can get very, very tall, and the leaves can get extremely large, like bigger than my head, which is pretty big. And so, depending on the species that you're growing, you want to make sure that you're choosing a variety that will grow where you're at. The yellow flowering variety will grow anywhere in North America. It will even, I have friends who grow it up in Alaska. So it's easy to grow, and it will reseed itself every year. The white flowering one is actually native, and you'll find it growing wild down in the Southwest sometimes, and the pink flowering variety is a little further south, and it needs warmer weather, but I've grown that one. In fact, there's a patch of it growing up in North Dakota at Knife River. If any of you guys have ever been there, there's a patch of the pink flowering variety growing there. So even though it's considered a semi-tropical plant, it's easy to grow, and we can all be trading these seeds instead of supporting big tobacco. Oh, by the way, I don't know, how many of you guys, did anyone in here grow up with someone chewing up pieces of tobacco and putting them on your bee stings? Yeah, me too. It's something that I grew up with. If we had a bee sting, even a mosquito bite, tobacco, the nicotine in there is extremely effective in getting rid of the pain of a bee sting or even a spider bite. I remember my 2 older sons, their grandma, she's a descendant of Chief Gall, and she told me that there are stories during Greasy Grass, or the Battle of Little Bighorn, where he got injured numerous times, but he would just come in, chew up a mouthful of tobacco, put it on his wound, tie it up, and go back out to fight some more, because tobacco will actually also prevent infection. Nicotine is antimicrobial in small amounts. Obviously, it can be toxic for all kinds of organisms in large amounts. And so, it is a wound healer. And I think that when we think of tobacco as a wound healer, and then we see what commercial tobacco has done to it, when we think of it as a healing herb, a precious medicine that is antimicrobial. It's antiseptic. It can take the pain of these horrible, bee stings and spider bites away. And we see how it's being abused and misused now. It kind of puts a different spin on it in our minds, right? So then a lot of you utilize red willow. It grows all over North America, from the north far down into the south. What a lot of people don't know, if you look in your booklets, I left a blank on every page for your name, for your tribal name, for your language, because I added the Dakota and Ojibwe names that I could find. But I wanted to make sure there was room for your language, for your name for these plants. And hopefully that will inspire you to investigate a little bit and add those into those blanks. I'm a botanist, right? So I do use a lot of Latin names for plants. I know that's very eye-rolling for people who are not botanists, but it's important when you work with plants to be able to communicate with people from all over. And Latin names, I could utilize those in Russia or China or Mongolia if I wanted, because people over there who work with plants would know those names. Red willow is not a willow, right? A lot of people don't know that because of where it grows. It grows near the water around true willows. Red willow is actually a dogwood, but it does look a lot like a willow, and it grows in the same places with them. But it's actually a species of dogwood, and it is such an incredible medicine for headaches and digestive issues. You can actually, I see a lot of my friends take the inner bark off, as you can see in the photo, which is of course really important in blends. And you can see in the center picture, that's actually the dried inner bark. But what do you do with the red stuff? What do you do with the outer bark? Well, first of all, I do have friends, like for instance, some tribes in Montana, leave the red part on. My husband's super picky, and he says that it doesn't taste as good, like it doesn't make as good a smoke when the red part is on there, so you have to shave it off. But that red, like the red outer bark, makes an incredible tea for digestive issues. If you have issues with acid reflux, if you have issues with GERD, if you have issues with heartburn on a regular basis, the red part of red willow is an incredible tea to help to ease some of those issues with heartburn. And it is so easy to make. And it's just a byproduct of processing red willow, so that's kind of nice as well. A tea from it is also a really good tonic. So for example, like for most tribes, you only harvest red willow bark during the very, very coldest months, right? January, February, depending on where you're at, December in some places. When you go out and you do that, there's a lot of physical sacrifice involved in that, depending on where you live. My husband always thinks that his Dakota relatives over here in Minnesota are spoiled because this grows everywhere. We see it in roadside ditches, whereas in South Dakota, one of our very first dates was him making me put on a snowsuit and walking 2.5 miles with him to harvest red willow. It was like our second date, and I know that sounds weird, but it made me fall in love with him. So I just thought that was, like such an awesome way, something really awesome that he was doing for his people, and it was extremely hard work. And I knew that if a guy could work that hard for this one plant, that he must be a guy that I could be interested in. So. But the inner bark and the outer bark, the red part, are also very good for headaches. They also help to lower blood pressure. I didn't even put that in there. Oh, by the way, we printed these at like 5 p.m. last night, and I've already thought of 6 more plants that I should add to the book. So I know there's a lot that aren't in there, and you all probably are looking at that like, oh, well, I also use blank, right? But this is one of them that I really love and that's very important and I think used very universally across North America and even into South America. Another one that is very common that a lot of people use is bearberry. If you look at the scientific name, uva ursi both mean bear in various like Latin languages. And this is a shrub that grows down close to the ground, right? It hugs to the ground if you've ever found it or harvested it before. The berries are edible. They don't taste super great, but they are edible. But it's mostly the leaves that are used. But I will tell you guys, the leaves and berries of bearberry, there's nothing better for a UTI, like a bladder infection for men, for women, for kids, for anyone. It is so effective, so much more effective than cranberry juice. It is almost shocking. You can make a tea out of this, and within an hour, you are not having pain from a bladder infection anymore. It is just a fantastic medicine. And so that's why I like to talk about that. But it is very good for bacterial infections in general. So if you know someone who has maybe cellulitis, which is a bacterial infection just under the skin, it's great for that. If you know someone who has trouble with infections, like even tooth infections, like they, maybe are gonna have to get a root canal or something like that, you could actually have them use this as a mouthwash. Very, very effective against bacterial infections. If any of you are science teachers in here or you work with kids and you love to do cool, fun experiments, you can actually get pre-made Petri dishes, right? You can buy them, on Amazon or at any science supply store. The Petri dishes already have the gel in them, and you can have your kids, the kids you work with, swab the inside of their mouth with a Q-tip and then inoculate the Petri dishes. Have you ever seen someone do that, like in a movie or maybe in person, where you swab or swipe the Petri dish with the little Q-tip? And then you can grow the stuff that is in your mouth. And let me tell you, there's nothing better for making kids think twice about who they're kissing than to have kids grow the stuff that's in their mouths in a Petri dish. It really makes them think. And all you have to do then the next day after you've grown all that gross stuff is take some of this bearberry or take some other traditional plants that you know are antimicrobial, put them on the dish and let that kill the stuff that's in the dish. If it's an antimicrobial plant, it will kill some of the stuff that's in the dish. And it's really amazing for kids to see that visual of like, I was always told that this was antibacterial, and now look, like I can see that it's antibacterial. It killed the bacteria in this dish. It's really fun, and you can do that very effectively with bearberry. This is sumac, and you can see I have a couple different species of sumac up here because my friends down in the Southwest probably recognize the one that's in the bottom left, Rus trilobata or Rus aromatica, whereas up here in Minnesota, up into Wisconsin, we more see the staghorn sumac that's on the right, with those big cones. All of these sumacs are used in smoking mixtures all throughout North America and down into South America, and even worldwide. Sumac is also, for any of my friends who are from the Middle East, sumac is an important spice that's used in the Middle East as well. And it's just this. Okay, like it's nothing special if you have a recipe that calls for sumac and you have a staghorn sumac growing in your yard, you can just literally go out and get these berries and dry them and grind them, and that's sumac powder. And these grow all over. But it's the leaves that are much more widely used in various tobacco mixtures. They kind of have a citrusy, lemony fragrance to them that's very pleasant, in my opinion, which always, one of the Lakota names for it is Cha'okgemena, which means the tree that kind of smells like poo. But it doesn't to me. But so I've always been curious about that. The English name, actually, of the one in the bottom left is skunk brush sumac. So some people at some point must have found the aroma of this plant to not be very pleasant, but to me it smells like lemons and oranges. And in fact, have any of you in here ever made sumac lemonade before? Right? It's delicious, and it does taste citrusy, and it has a beautiful pink color and a beautiful aroma to it. Add a little bit of honey in there, and you have a really tasty lemonade. So you can do that with the leaves and the fruits. You can make that lemonade with either one. And the leaves also of the staghorn sumac will turn bright red in the fall, and there's a lot of people who really prefer to use them in smoking mixtures after they turn bright red. And then some people do use the berries. They'll dry the berries and then they'll grind them up and use those in smoking mixtures or as a spice when cooking. I love adding these to ground up to soups and things like that, or to chicken dishes. Really, really good. So it's a great example of food as medicine because it's also extremely high in vitamin C. Now, why were we always told when we were younger to drink orange juice when we got sick? People would go out and buy oranges for us when we were sick. It's because they are supposedly high in vitamin C. And actually, citrus is not all that high in vitamin C. It's things like this, like the sumac, much higher in vitamin C than citrus. And so if you drink a tea out of this, you're getting a ton of vitamin C. And vitamin C boosts our immune systems. Some of you probably work in medical fields, you know this. Vitamin C boosts our immune systems and helps us fight off infection. I know a lot of people who are very prone to post-surgical infections will do even IV vitamin C before surgeries. Well, you can actually get a lot of bioavailable vitamin C from sumac, from eating it, from drinking the tea, all kinds of stuff. This is one of my personal favorites. I always love the Ojibwe name, Chibibigwewanashk. I don't know, it just sounds cool. But the Dakota name, Pangi Tanka, means like big carrot, basically. And the root is like a big carrot. It's like a parsnip, and you can eat the root just like you would a parsnip. It's a wonderful root vegetable. But my favorite part of cow parsnip are those beautiful stems. You peel the fuzzy hairs off of the stem, and it is like sweet, crunchy, delicious asparagus. It is so fantastic. One of my favorite vegetables. If any of you guys watch Alexis Nelson, she's also known as the Black Forager. She's always making little breads, like little round, almost like little fry breads, but she pan fries them, and they always have cow parsnip leaves in them. It's a great way to get greens in your diet, and the leaves are absolutely delicious. But for smoking mixtures, see those dried seeds there in the top picture, the brown picture? Those are dried up seeds of cow parsnip, and they have a beautiful carroty, like this is a member of the carrot family, by the way, a beautiful carrot-like, celery-like aroma. They remind me a lot of bear root, if you use bear root. This is a very great alternative to bear root in your smoking mixtures. Bear root is being very quickly over-harvested. It's in the book. And so I always say, you could just as easily use the seeds of this in your smoking mixtures. It has that same flavor. It has a lot of the same medicinal properties to it. It's wonderful for lung health. And in fact, this whole plant, cow parsnip, the root, the seeds, the stems, the leaves, make a fantastic tea for opening up your lungs if you have asthma. Like let's say you're out hiking or fishing and you forgot your inhaler and there's cow parsnip growing there. Just make sure you don't mistake it for another plant. But it is wonderful as a tea for opening up the lungs. So I have asthma, so I always try to make sure I know the plants that are good for lungs, and this is one of them. This is anise hyssop. in English, and it's actually a type of mint. Now, something that I didn't put in the book were other types of mint, which can all be used in smoking mixtures. My husband doesn't like mint in his offering mixtures and his tobacco mixtures. He says that they're just too strong, but he does use this. If any of you all have ever tasted this grows all over the place. I actually found some in New Mexico a couple of months ago. This tastes like a black jelly bean. Have you ever eaten one of the leaves? It tastes just like a black jelly bean. And don't let that throw you off, because if you don't like black licorice, that's okay. The leaves still taste good, even to people who don't like black licorice. Has a very strong anise flavor to them, and those lend very well to various mixtures once they're dried. But really, like during COVID, my family and I were making medicine kits for thousands of people all over North America, and this was one of the herbs we used most often. It is so wonderful for strengthening the lungs and helping to fight off lung infections, and it's just so great for digestion, which was a big issue with COVID. People had digestive issues. So this is, such a fantastic plant, and it's beautiful, and it's a pollinator plant. So you could plant this in your garden. If you planted just 2 of these this year, okay, still you have time, okay? So when you go home, go to your local nursery, find anise hyssop, plant 2 of them, and next year you will have 10 of them. It spreads very well. It's beautiful, and again, bees love it. So it's a really great one to know. I know I don't have all day to talk to you all, but I have to tell you a quick story about this plant. So an elder on Standing Rock, where I worked for a long time at Sitting Bull College. I taught there for about 20 years. But an elder on Standing Rock named Zona Loans Arrow once told me a story, and remember, this is a different time. This was way back in the day. I think if she were still with us, she would be in her 90s now. And when she was in her early 80s, she told me that the reason it's called Wakbeya Tapi in Lakota and Dakota is that that means the leaf that you chew, okay? And it's used to freshen your breath and make your breath smell good. And she said that when she was young and she was just dating, she was being courted by the man who would become her husband. They finally got to go on a date without a chaperone, which was a very big deal because they had had a chaperone on every date before that, and they finally got to go on a date with no chaperone. And she was like, "All right," she even said this to me like this. She was like, "I wanted to get kissed. I wanted my first kiss, and I was ready." And so I took a little handful of Wakbeya Tapi and I put it in my purse, and I had it there, and I was just nibbling on it all night because I wanted my breath to be ready for my first kiss. And at some point in the evening, the man who would become her husband just planted a big kiss on her, super romantic moment. She said she did the little leg lift and everything. It was beautiful, and he just planted a big old kiss on her. And but she panicked right after he kissed her, and she thought that she had to kind of play coy, what she perceived as coy, and be like, "Oh my God, how dare you? I'm not that kind of girl. You should not have kissed me without my permission." And he was very scared. And he said, "I'm so sorry." He said, "But I smelled that Wakbeya Tapi on your breath all night. And I just thought I thought that was why." So another ingredient that's used in a lot of smoking mixtures are various berries. Now, I've already talked about sumac berries, which can be used in smoking mixtures, but a lot of people put different dried fruits in there. My husband and I know a guy with a freeze dryer up in Montana, and he freeze dries his huckleberries and then grinds them into a powder and puts a little bit of huckleberry powder into his smoking mixtures. And it sure does make it taste sweet, but he's not smoking them, like traditional tobacco isn't something like you're smoking every day, because I can't imagine smoking fruit every day, right? So it's only for ceremonies, it's very infrequently, and so I was talking to my husband, and he said that when he was growing up, how many of you have seen dried choke cherries before, or like a choke cherry patty? Right, many of you come from cultures, from people who pick the choke cherries, which are right in the center photo. You harvest those, and then you mash them up, pit and all, to dry them. And now, a lot of people think that's very odd. I don't know if you guys know this, but if you look in any North American field guide to edible wild plants, they list choke cherries as poisonous, right? Now, how many of you come from people who eat choke cherries? Almost everyone in this room does, right? Choke cherries have a little bit of fruit and a very large pit in the center. So most people who utilize choke cherries as food and medicine use the pit as well. And indeed, I'm sure some of your elders have told you, the pit is where all the medicine is, right? That's where all the protein is. There are tons of phytonutrients in the pit. There are complex carbohydrates in the pit that are very important for our health. And so the pit is eaten. And cherries and almonds are closely related. So really, the pit inside of a choke cherry is very similar in flavor and texture to an almond. But there's also another little compound in the pits of all cherries that isn't so good for us. Does anyone know what that compound is? Cyanide, exactly. There is cyanide, and a significant amount of cyanide in the pits of choke cherry. So as I always ask all my students when I'm teaching a class, how is it that choke cherries and their pits have become such an important part of traditional diets, even though they have a lot of cyanide in them? How is it that people are able to eat them without harmful effects? So the number one answer I get from my students, I always have students say, well, maybe it was just, we ate a lot of them over time and we built up a resistance. And I always tell them, no, you are not resistant to cyanide. Please do not test that theory. You're not cyanide resistant. What it is with the crushing and drying, I'm not a chemist, but this is what the chemist I worked with told us. The acidity of the fruit juice breaks the bond between the cyanide and whatever it's attached to, and it just dissipates as a gas. So you're only left with all the nutrients in the pits. And I utilize this as a really great example for people of like the brilliance of indigenous people and the brilliance and incredible use of indigenous science. Because, Native people found a way to process something that could have actually been fairly harmful if they eat a lot of them raw and turned it into a primary food source, right? Just through their own scientific research. So amazing. Choke cherries are also used, dried choke cherry patties are used in smoking mixtures as well. They're ground up further into a powder and used in various smoking mixtures. And they are so good for the lungs. It's so nice when one of the things that you're using infrequently in a mixture is also a medicine for the lungs, right? Because we all know that cigarette tobacco is not good for the lungs. This, of course, is bear root. It's related to the cow parsnip. And so this one is actually being over-harvested in a lot of places, so we have to be careful with it. You might know some great stands, and maybe you have protocols for harvesting in your culture that protect the plant. But I think that it's important to harvest it very sustainably. It is such a fantastic, I don't know how many of you all suffer from migraines, but I can't tell you the hundreds and hundreds of people that I've worked with who I have given bear root to who get terrible, terrible migraines and then burn bear root, inhale the smoke deeply through their nose, and you can actually watch them and the migraine will almost instantly just dissipate. And it's like they open their eyes, and it's like a whole new world for them, because it is, such a great medicine without the side effects of a lot of the migraine pills that are on the market now. Bear root, the smoke from it is so wonderful. One of my friends who I gave it to said it was like the migraine was being pulled out of the top of my head, right? So pretty cool. Such a great medicine. Also great for teas. My husband puts bear root into soups instead of celery. He's not a big fan of the texture of celery, so he'll use bear root for the flavor in medicine instead, because it tastes a lot like celery. The dock, of course, that's in here, if any of you have eaten dock leaves before, they taste like lemon. They're very, very sour, which is why in English they're sometimes called sorrel. So sorrel or curly dock is fantastic. Those red seeds that you see on the right, so on the left photo is the immature seeds. The photo on the right are the mature seeds, and that's the stage when they're harvested and used in various tobacco mixtures. I know that there are a couple of Eastern tribes who actually call this tobacco. Like this is their plant that they call tobacco. And it's utilized a lot in smoking mixtures. You can also take those seeds and grind them up into flour and use them to make bread and crackers and all kinds of stuff. They're actually super high in protein and really delicious, and they're everywhere. When you guys are driving home or you're going wherever you're going next, look on the sides of the road for an entire field of rusty red color. That will be dock. It is super common, and it grows in huge clusters on the sides of the road. So if you've ever wondered what that rusty red colored plant is on the side of the road, it's probably dock. And it is edible and medicinal. The root, which by the way, even though this grows in such huge clusters all over North America, you can buy a pound of the root for $36. $36. I have a pound of the root growing right outside my front door because I wouldn't let my husband mow them because they're medicine. And it is super common, and yet it's like very expensive. A lot of these herb companies exploit the fact that we don't know what plants look like, right? It is used, the reason that it's so expensive and the reason that it's so utilized by a lot of people is because there's almost nothing better to cleanse and protect the liver. A tea made from dock root, which they call yellow dock root online, if you were to look it up, the tea is so fantastic at helping with liver, the liver to be help to produce bile and improves liver function in general. Such an amazing tea. It's even being used in Western medicine a lot now by various doctors. They're recommending their patients drink dock root tea because it's so wonderful for the liver. It's also a good tonic and very cleansing in general, but when I think of curly dock, I always think of the liver. There are a lot of evergreen species that are used in smoking mixtures. Some people will only use them separately and use them for offerings or to burn, not in smoking mixtures because of all the resin that's in, like think of the sap of a pine tree, how sticky that is. I personally don't want to get that into my lungs, but I know a lot of people who will use flat cedar leaves, for example, in their mixtures. Or they'll use like juniper leaves or even juniper berries in their mixtures as well. I think that's personal preference or what you were like the people who came before you. That's what we always talk about is following protocols, talking to your community, talking to the people who came before you, and learning about that. This is another one that grows very widely. It is a type of sunflower, like it's very closely related to sunflowers. It's called compass plant, and it's called compass plant because those beautiful flowers will kind of turn and follow the sun like a compass. The root of this is also resinous and sticky. But you guys, there's almost nothing that is as good of an expectorant. You know, like, what's that stuff? Mucinex? Like you see the commercials for? What Mucinex does is it thins up the mucus that's stuck in your lungs, and so you're better able to like cough it up and get it out of your lungs, right? Well, Compass plant does that without any of the side effects. So it is such a great plant, and it's beautiful. So this is another great plant that you could put in your yard. It adds visual interest. It has beautiful foliage. It's also a great pollinator plant, and it's a wonderful medicine. My uncle Les Ducheneau from Cheyenne River, he taught high school for like 35 years. He taught the Lakota language in local high schools on the Cheyenne River Reservation. And he said that anytime kids would come into his class with anxiety or like in a panic, just really like not doing well, like if they were crying, let's say they had gone through a bad breakup or something bad was happening at home, he would use the root of this as a smudge for them. He would burn it and he would smudge them with it. And he said that it would instantly calm even the most anxious of young people. It is a really wonderful medicine, and it's been used that way for a long time, and some of you all might use it for that. But it is so calming and wonderful. And so if you know a young person who suffers from anxiety, it's a great medicine to have on hand for them. This actually looks like tobacco. This is a wild plant, wild 4 o'clock. And why is it called a 4 o'clock? Because you can actually stand there in a field of these flowers at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and all of a sudden, all these closed up buds open. It's like fireworks. It's so cool. That's why they're called 4 o'clocks. And so this is one that's actually used almost exactly like commercial tobacco, only it's not sprayed. You can grow this one in your gardens, but the leaves have very much the same smell, like aroma, flavor of cigarette tobacco. So a lot of people who are trying to quit smoking will get a hold of the dried leaves of this plant instead and use it instead because there's no nicotine in it. So it's kind of like having, it's a little bit of a crutch to lean on, and it's used that way, but it's also used a lot in various smoking mixtures. This is such a cool plant. I have been told, Merlin Deegan, he's Ojibwe from White Earth, and he told me that this is the original tobacco. Even before people were using Nicotiana species and those like spread around, this is the one that was used, and there's no nicotine in it. But this is like, I guess, according to Merlin and others that I've talked to, one of the most highly prized tobaccos out there. It is a wild plant. You can see it has a beautiful flower on it, but it's actually the leaves that are used for the tobacco. And it is a wonderful plant for treating bronchitis and pneumonia as well. It just loosens up the stuff in your lungs, helps you to get it out, but it's really great. So it's considered an antispasmodic herb. So like if you have, like, think of muscles twitching, if you have issues with that, if you have a young person who runs track and they end up getting like muscle spasms, this is a great one. If you have that little muscle under your eye that's always twitching, this is a great tea for you. If you have asthma, which is actually like with asthma, oftentimes your airways are contracting over and over like this, you can utilize this to stop those contractions as well. So it's a wonderful antispasmodic plant, but it's also the original tobacco. Okay, now I put this one last, and I wasn't going to put it in here because it's actually not a native plant. It was brought over a very long time ago, and it was brought over as a lung medicine. This is mullein. You will see it growing all over the place. Some people call it candlestick plant because it has that like long spike. It is such a wonderful medicine, and I've seen so many people deal with their lung issues with this. I saw so many people use this during COVID and get through COVID a lot better because of this plant. So even though it's not, it's only been here since like the 1700s, it is still a fantastic medicinal plant that's very good for lungs. It's also called, some people call it toilet paper as well. And I suppose like with those fuzzy leaves, maybe it's, it's not Charmin, but it probably does the job. Here's my deal with that, okay? I am very sensitive to the hairs that are on mullein, and so I actually can't drink the tea unless I filter it very, very well. But also, some, like back in the day in Europe, women who couldn't afford to buy rouge, blush for their cheeks, would take these leaves and rub them on their cheeks as like a blush, because the hairs would be kind of irritating and it would make their cheeks turn red. So I'm not sure if I'd want to use something that does that as toilet paper, But it is a fantastic medicine nonetheless. See those yellow flowers on that stalk? If you guys know a young person, or if you yourself are prone to ear infections and earaches, oh my gosh, mullein oil is absolutely the savior of so many kids that I know who have frequent ear infections. All you do is take those flowers, infuse them into some olive oil, like really clean olive oil, and then you strain it through a couple layers of a t-shirt, and you're left with mullein oil, okay? So I usually let it infuse for about 3 weeks before I strain it. And you can use those in a dropper into ears for the worst ear infection, and it will help to clear that ear infection up. Even better if you mix the mullein flowers and garlic together to make an ear oil. Fantastic. And so it's not just the leaves that are used, it's the flowers as well. Such a wonderful plant that came over here, I think, as a gift. So. Okay, that's it. Any questions that anyone has on anything I've talked about today? I can't speak for my husband, but I can probably answer some questions. Before I take questions, I wanted to say that my husband started smoking when he was 13 years old. And he now has been completely smoke and cigarette free for 13 years. I know. It was interesting because I've never smoked in my entire life. I come from a family of where I have 2 older biological brothers and my parents, and they all have smoked my entire life. My 2 older brothers started smoking when they were probably 13 or 14, and they still smoke. And my parents, my mom passed away in January, but my dad still smokes in spite of horrible, horrible lung issues. And so I promised myself I would never be with someone who smoked. And so before my husband asked me out, he had quit smoking cold turkey and hasn't smoked since. And I recently saw a photo of him that someone had taken on the Bigfoot ride when he was about 16, because he used to ride that ride every year, and he was smoking in it. And I was like, gosh, it's so weird. I've never thought of you as a smoker because you've never smoked since we've been together. And he told me, like, we had a discussion about it, especially in light of us coming to this conference. And he told me that when he was growing up, probably the one thing that would have kept him from picking up the habit is if people had told him that tobacco is actually this sacred plant and shouldn't be abused. And he said no one ever told him that. And in fact, they kind of separated out, like people were always smoking cigarettes, and he thought of that as something very different than when people were offering tobacco for ceremonies. No one ever told him that they were the same plant. And he said that's why he thinks he was able to do that. And it wasn't until he really changed his way of thinking and started thinking about the spirit of that plant and how what he says is tobacco has been colonized just like we have been colonized as indigenous people all over the world. And so, decolonizing tobacco, like doing that favor for tobacco and helping it, is something that is very important to him. And so he hasn't smoked in a long time. I just wanted to tell you guys that. Any questions about anything in the book? Yes. So curly dock actually is native. There are non-native Rumex species all over the place that have crossed, but curly dock Rumex crispus is native. It's so interesting because there's a whole movement in botany right now to talk about, here's something so crazy. And I'm sorry to get off on a tangent, but this is important. I don't know how many of you know this, but when early botanists, including Lewis and Clark, when they were moving across, there was this push and this attitude that it wasn't even possible that God would allow European plants to grow over here, right? There's no way he's going to give these European plants, these same plants, to these savages. You can actually find that in some of the journals of Lewis and Clark. You can find it in old botanical journals from botanists. And so there are a lot of plants that people have been told are not native that actually are, like dandelion. Dandelion is actually a native plant. There's a totally native species of burdock. That's the really tall plant with huge dinosaur-like leaves that has like Velcro stuff that'll stick to your dog's fur. That's like, there's a totally native species of that. Or even plantain, not platanos, not the like green bananas, but plantain that grows down near the ground. Have you guys ever heard that called white man's footprint? Right? It is a native plant. Like there is a non-native species of plantain that came over and has crossed with our native species, but plantain is native, and dock is another one. For a long time, people have thought that dock was not native, or that was in a lot of books, but they have found that that one actually predates colonialism. Did that answer your question? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the whole question. Okay.
Hello? How do you navigate using plants in, say, like a restoration area or something of that nature?
Yep, so like using non-native plants or using any plants in restoration?
Well, you confused me now, because I thought dock was, I know there's some that were native. I'm from California area, and we have like, I think, golden dock.
Yep.
Which is very hard to find. I've never actually seen it myself, but I'm just curious, how would one navigate? I use like CalFlora as a resource I use to kind of like find out what things might be considered native or non-native when I'm doing that type of work. I was just wondering if you do anything like.
Yep. And I actually don't think Rumex crispus is native to California, but I use CalFlora as well. So it's interesting because I still see mullein seeds for sale online, and that, even though it's such a nice plant and it's so useful, I'm like, there's plenty of mullein out there already. We do not need to be planting it, right? And I will see people use it like in their medicine gardens and things like that. And I always say something, but I try to be very gentle because it's become a very important plant to so many. I try to utilize only native plants in any restoration work I do, and I try to always think locally specific. Like, for example, I try to think locally specific, but there was a recent planting in North Minneapolis where they could not find a particular species, so they used a cultivar of it instead. I'm actually okay with that. And let me tell you why. So right now, I actually made a post recently. I'm getting very worried about my husband and my kids and their traditional foods because there are so many plant diseases that are affecting chokecherries, wild plums, June berries. A lot of their most important traditional foods are being decimated by non-native fungi and other plant diseases that are. It's kind of like with the emerald ash borer, right? And how that wiped out a lot of the ash trees in the east and then here too. I'm okay with resistant cultivars used in restoration. I feel like it's, as long as my kids have access to those plants, I can justify it not being the exact same. I had to, that took a lot for me to say because it's like a tough question and a tough issue, but we can talk more about it too. Any other questions, comments? Yes. Yep, so I work for natives, and I'm sorry, I get so excited. I'm ADHD diagnosed. It's not just something that I just say. And so I forgot to introduce the fact that I work at NATIFS, N-A-T-I-F-S. It's North American Traditional Indigenous Food Systems. If any of you guys know Sean Sherman, Chef Sean Sherman, he goes by the Sous Chef sometimes, and he's, so Natives is the nonprofit that runs the restaurant Owamini. How many of you guys have gotten to eat at Owamini? Yay. If you haven't gotten to eat at Owamini, come find me. I might be able to get you a reservation. Totally indigenous restaurant here in the Twin Cities. It's really fantastic. But we run Owamini, and then we also run the Indigenous Food Lab. And through the Indigenous Food Lab, I teach classes along with Francesca, who might still be here, and others. We offer classes in all kinds of stuff. Our schedule is online. We tend not to teach as many classes during the summer, because especially as a botanist, it's our busy season. But we teach classes online as well, things like that. So, yep. And there's a question back here. Oh yeah, repeating the questions. So she asked, they asked if we taught any other classes besides what was offered here today. Yes, we do. I taught for about 25 years at various tribal colleges, and it was very hard for me to leave, but I wanted to change. But I'm still teaching, just not at a university. So, any other questions? Yes. How do you harvest mullein? That's the question. How do you harvest mullein? So it's a good question because I harvest it differently than other people. Now, when I'm harvesting stinging nettles, I don't wear gloves because I was always taught that if you pick stinging nettles barehanded, you'll never get arthritis. And that has really, I've found that to be very true over the years. With mullein, I have to wear gloves just because I'm so sensitive to those hairs. And then I also have to be careful because if any of you have ever cut mullein up before and had it in a bag, when you open that bag, hairs just come flying out everywhere. So I even have to open the bag when I'm outdoors so that I'm not breathing those in. Not everyone, my husband can eat a mullein leaf, okay, and it not bother him. I can't do that. That would be very harmful for me. So, you just have to figure out how sensitive you are to it. But the best way is to just pull the leaf off at the base. Using the basal leaves of the mullein, I've found they have more medicine than the leaves that are actually on the stalk. So I don't know if that's helpful to anyone, but any other questions? Yes. Yeah, and I'm probably not the best person to ask that question to, but I know how, like in our family, so the question is, with this, psychedelics becoming, people are calling it the psychedelic renaissance, with that becoming such a popular thing even among the mainstream, and with traditional medicines, including psychedelics, but not just psychedelics, a lot of traditional medicines, native medicines are becoming exploited and overused. How do we protect that? So first of all, I think I'm a better person to ask about how to protect the plants themselves, because when I'm teaching, I almost never focus on skills. I almost never focus on, well, here's how you pick all these plants, and then here's how you make them into something, right? I focus much more on relationship. How to build relationships with plants, how to look at plants as sentient beings who are our relatives. Because I feel like and I've found this to be true in my personal experience, I can't speak for anyone else, but I have found that the vast majority of people, especially non-Indigenous people, walk around with plant blindness. They can walk right over food and medicine and have no idea it's there. If you ever watch any post-apocalyptic movie or like The Walking Dead, you know that people are constantly walking over food and medicine and then talking about starving and being sick, right? And so I feel like if I can just help to get rid of some of that plant blindness and help people see the importance, the sentience, the validity, the sacredness of plants, they are going to walk on the land differently and treat our plant relatives better. Now, I'm probably, like I said, I probably don't have an answer in terms of the intellectual property of that. It's like that book, it takes a lot to put that information in there and to put it in a book in print. And it was something that my husband struggled with, but he also feels like getting the information out there for people is also equally important. And so we always try to go through IRB, right? So like review boards, and then ask permission from elders and ask for advice from elders. He would be a much better person to answer that question. He actually works with Indigidata and data sovereignty, so sorry that he is not here to help. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you guys so much. Thank you very much for having me.